Welcome to Happy Times and Places, in which I, Toby Haydoke, try to guess what my special guests' favourite things about their chosen Doctor Who story are.
Hi, Toby. I have chosen the Ribos operation.
So that was Dan Rebellato, a playwright for stage and radio. Very smart, very witty, very talented guy who has chosen the Ribos operation. We're on to episode 4. So I hope you are poised with your player ready, or your imaginations geared to summon your memories of. Sorry, my set's wobbled. The Ribos Operation Part 4, which we're going to press play of in 3, 2, 1. So it's a great title sequence, isn't it, this? So I don't know about you, but this is just too early for my to have embedded itself in my memory banks from first time round. I do remember the first time I saw it, though. It was on a not very good quality VHS bootleg, and I wasn't hugely impressed, if I'm honest. You don't... now here's an interesting thing. Because I was young. It's one of those rare things where there's a bit of extra footage inserted in a sort of Perils of Pauline kind of way to explain how the Doctor gets out of the cliffhanger. Oddly, because it's not particularly a cliffhanger-y, it's not an immediate peril, somebody's about to shoot him. It's more of a kind of, he's there's a threat. There's a literally mouthed threat of death, but not a literal, he's about to die any second now threat of death. But nonetheless, they still inserted a little bit of a cheat there, which is less troublesome, actually, because it's not a... he's fallen off that cliff, and yet when we see it next week, he's fallen off a cliff and somebody's had time to build a shelf underneath it. So I don't object to it in the way that I would in the sort of cheating ones. Remember, we used to watch a thing called Daredevils of the Red Circle, which was on at weekday tea times. It was a repeated black and white thing, like King of the Rocket Men, and they'd have a thing where somebody would go, "I'm going to kill you now," bang, and then next week it'd be, "I'm going to kill you now," and then somebody would go, "Look," they go, "What?" Then everybody would have time to leave the house, drive to Glasgow, start a small business, get married, and then they go, bang, where have they gone? So it wasn't as bad as that. These are pretty decent caves. Ken Ledsham has done a very good job with the sets, I have to say. And in fact, that brings me to Tim Dickinson, who is one of my patrons. I hate how that sounds. I'm on Patreon. Some people are kind enough to contribute. But when I say he is one of my patrons, I'm aware I sound like the Queen. One just has to get used to the new way of doing things. The blogging of that is quite fun. Gus Benson's having fun with Romana's furry surround. Tim Dickinson says, "Does this look better, or should I say a step up, than many of the studio-only stories from the previous few years?" I think it does. I think it looks a lot better than a lot of what surrounds it. I think at this time the historicals, or those in a historical period, tended to look better the sort of pure sci-fi. And although this is, there are elements of this that are, to all intents and purposes, historical, which is a very clever use of resources. Set it on a sort of medieval type planet. Add a laser sword here and there, androids of Tara. And you have the best of both worlds. You have the BBC's brilliant costume and set design infrastructure that is based on, training and stored resources, things from other productions, and I think you're automatically at an advantage. And I think this story looks absolutely magnificent. Look at those furs and things like that you probably wouldn't have been able to, acquire for a one-off. But if they're kicking around because they've been used in, I think War and Peace. It should have been the Anthony Hopkins one that John Davis directed in 72, 73. I'm guessing. They're not from that. They're from something similar. So yes, I think Tim, they do. It does look better from much that's around it. And he also asks, is this the greatest Robert Holmes script? Well, Dan alluded to how brilliant it was, and the world building, which I think is very good. I think what it misses, which I don't miss, and I'm doing that terrible thing now, is worrying on behalf of other people. But I do know people who don't get particularly carried away by the joy of the Ribos operation, because it is missing a couple of sort of traditional elements of Doctor Who. It's not terribly scary really, and it doesn't really have much of a monster, and the sci-fi is cursory. But you see, you get stuff like this. Timothy Bateson is great in this scene. He's been great since. He's great all the way through. And he's still doing 1970s comedy old man acting in a way. But there's such a truth and a decency to it, and he's a man of a broken mind as well, and that's clear. Is worth a life. Yeah, it's beautiful. And commitment. Have you noticed Timothy Bateson actually removed his false teeth in order to convince even more as Binro. Do people have false teeth anymore? I don't know. I know there's an actor called David Ross who did a lot of Bleasdale work, who I've seen on stage. The original Crichton. I read an interview with him where he said that when he was quite young, somebody told him to have all his teeth removed, so he had them all removed, and they're false teeth, which I find quite very strange. God, that's going to hurt, isn't it? But anyway, I know a couple of people who've got the odd solo missing tooth. Yes, these two are doing sort of comedy bad guy banter. Up and a bit to the left. Yes, it's not very comfortable, but that's the point, to show that these men will stop at nothing. And he's so good, and he's got some great stuff to come in this. And Robert Keegan was the sort of mother that the sort of actor that my mother knew. I always judge an actor by whether my mum knows who they are or not, because I'm not from a theatrical family at all. So if you'd broken through to the consciousness of my mum, you'd done pretty well. Perhaps that's what I aspire to be, the sort of mum my actor knows who he is. Ha. It's interesting. I was looking at Colin Baker's costume the other day. Pebble Dash to hallucinogens on a clown, and And it's a shame. And I really like Colin Baker, and well, I'll talk about him in the Colin Baker ones, but I think he was ill-served by his costume, and I was trying to work out why, because Tom Baker doesn't wear things that normal people wear either. But there's something about that costume that is sort of timeless. I don't look at Tom Baker in this and think this is from the 1970s. Now, I wonder if that's because it was already there when I came into Doctor Who. So it just seemed normal, because I guess John Pertwee's costumes are quite dated, the hair and the velvet jackets. But to me, they seem sort of timeless, and I would have been happy with Pertwee wearing that now. Whereas I'm not sure, Colin Baker's stuff. I don't know. It just seems to me that the first 4 Doctors in particular had a costuming policy where, even though their wardrobe is somewhat avant-garde, it seems to me real and plausible. There's a natural sort of flair and eccentricity to it, whereas, and I will mention this in the McCoy stuff, and it's been mentioned before about, you can only have so many question marks before your mysteriousness is seriously undermined. Look how mysterious I am, It's like Colin from the Fast Show, isn't it? The party going, how wacky I am. I do like these two. And, the Robert Holmes double acts are, classic Holmesian double act is only a sentence you'll hear issued by Doctor Who fans. But, he's hit upon a winning formula. And I think what's important is you believe that these people know each other from before. Who wants everything? I'll settle for 90%. Oh, and she's got feathers, the Seeker, as well. And that was always a... So, how do we feel about the fact that the Seeker absolutely correctly predicts what's going to happen? That all but one of us is doomed to die. Now, we don't get that in Doctor Who very often, where somebody who's sort of... And occasionally I think it could be seen as self-fulfilling prophecy rather than... or a bit of baloney, like the Beast of Fang Rock or whatever, or Angus MacReynolds' folk tale is sort of allowed, because in those times and in those parts, folk tales were part and parcel of what's going on. But this is, some shaman type, some bone shaker, who nonetheless turns out to be correct. How do we feel about that? Because that's not very of the Doctor Who universe. And in fact, especially from Robert Holmes, who would normally seek to undermine such stuff. The Time Lord gods, that's all sort of a bit of propaganda and a bit of show. So, but it works. The costume and the makeup are great. The performance is very good. I think all the performances in this are great. I don't think there's a duff performance in it. And I've got to be aware of that when I choose my... it's Binro. And I think the only bit I remember from the book is coming up, which is Binro's death, which Ian Marter makes fairly, characteristically on Marter brand, pretty grotesque. I think he gets his side blown out or whatever, which is pretty grim and pretty unpleasant. We'll talk about it when it comes. That's a nice witty touch. The Doctor's scarf hanging out of the bottom of the costume, and I like the fact that actually the captain and the people of Ribos have their own little contribution. And actually, the captain, who has been rather sort of outwitted by people and patronised by the great rich warlord and all of that, Oh, poor old Binro does actually cause their downfall. But I want to get to this. Oh, it's very sad. I don't like that particularly. I don't think it's charming fellow. What little I saw of him, I suppose, is a reasonable. And I think it. I think it sort of. It goes against what the story's been doing, and I know these are funny characters, and I know there's other stuff going on. And I suppose the writer could be going, well, death isn't always, there's not always time to shed a tear or for a moment or whatever. But it's a shame. I thought Binro deserved better than a semi joke by Garen. I like Unstoff's reaction, and the staging of it's compromised as well because of the space and the nature of it. But I know it's a minor thing, and it doesn't spoil anything for me. I think it's just a moment that I think could have been worked better. I love that Garen, for all his bluster, actually underneath it all, Ian Cuthbertson suggests actually, realism and humanity, and although he's a lovable rogue, he's got more depth than that, and he's a clever enough actor, and he's given enough moments to show that. Yes, I like the fact that people of Ribos have their little moment of revenge upon essentially lots of people from elsewhere who've come and patronised them, tried to nick their stuff. It's a bit harsh on the Seeker, I would say, who the captain knows is down there. He's essentially gone, well, she could be collateral damage, really. I've got a feeling, didn't Graham MacDonald... he says something like, my guts, doesn't he? My guts are flattened. That's really grim. I like the fact that you like Sholak and the Graf's relationship, and he dies with his eyes open. There's a now I'm sure this is some sort of military thing going on here, some sort of thing from the people of the Graf's world and Legion or whatever, because I think he kisses him, doesn't he? I think he gives him a big old kiss. But I don't think that's to suggest anything. I think it's a ritualistic thing. But I also I think there's a little bit of, does he kiss him? Yeah, go on, kiss him. Yeah, I love it. I love that. Yeah, he kisses his eyes, so it's definitely ritualistic. But I think if you wanted to write slash fiction about the Graf Vindicay and Sholak, it wouldn't be unreasonable. I think so. So go for it. Go for it, Stephanie. What's that a reference to? No. Graham MacDonald, I interrupted myself, I think had said in his memo about the last episode, please make sure this doesn't sort of fall into, like what crappy polystyrene rocks territory. Actually, I thought the Rockfall stuff was done pretty well. George Spenton Foster, the director, doesn't have a great reputation. I think that's because certainly a few actors I've spoken to, I know Brian Croucher didn't get on with him, and I think he was a drinker, but but I know some actors well liked him, and as I say, he went back quite a few years within the BBC, and I think June Hudson speaks highly of him. But June Hudson speaks highly of June Hudson is an example to us all, is because she's so lovely, and I don't think enough people sort of talk about Spenton Foster really, because I think he does a decent job. We have a bit of a blind spot with the directors of this period of the show. Michael Hayes was interviewed quite late by Doctor Who magazine, does make it onto the DVDs. Spenton Foster seemed to sort of vanish. As I say, I'm not sure on the internet there's a clear date of death, unlike for the Seeker, who gets shot in the face. But I think around 1992, I think he went to Australia. Norman Stewart, nobody really talks about. Darryl Blake only directed the one story, whereas I think we're sort of more familiar with the directors who came before and after. I don't know why. It might just be me. So if your story is different, of course. He's lost his mind. He's so sad about his lover Sholak. I've decided to make this canon now. He does it really well. And it is quite stagey, so I suppose anybody that is, is now used to a diet of very whispery acting may find this a little bit jarring. But there's truth in vividness, and the graph needs to be big. I think Paul Seed's great, and a good director too. He directed a thing called Murder Rooms about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And he's a really good contributor to the DVD. Yeah, see, there's a lot of hugging. They're a very tactile military force where the graph comes from. and I love this moment. Oh, is this going to be my moment? Because it's one of those rare things. There's a bit like it in Ghostlight with Ace, but where you can hear what is in the Graph's mind, and he really commits to that. And it's quite a hard thing to pull off, and I think that could have looked awful. But the addition of the sound of what is going on in his mind, and there's something slightly comical about an off-camera explosion where you don't see bits of flesh flying about because you can't, because it's Saturday tea time or whatever. But I think that's really effectively done. I love that, and it's not played for laughs. It's done absolutely properly. And the banter between these characters is great. And you could tell the Doctor sort of likes Garen, and that Tom Baker likes Ian Cuthbertson. You imagine they had fun in the bar afterwards. What else did Tim say? Is Ribos the pinnacle of the Graham's-Williams era? For my money, it looks good. The wit is part of the bluster and interactions between the characters, and it's so blooming cosy to watch on a winter's evening. In this household, we love the Seeker. In fact, whenever we lose something in the house, we shout, "Seek and find!" Ah! This makes the Ribos operation one of the few stories that unites the entire family. I want to go to the Dickinson's house. And is it the greatest Robert Holmes script? I think I think it's a lovely script, and I think it's a pretty faultless script. But I think in terms of Doctor Who, as I say, it's perhaps missing some of the elements to make it, typical Doctor Who. And of course, when something isn't typical Doctor Who, I sort of cherish it because there's less like it. Is it the pinnacle of the Graham Williams era? Well, that's an interesting question. Well, there is City of Death, of course. Horror of Fang Rock, although, that's a bit of a cheat because he did sort of inherit it a bit. I don't know. We all have our favourites, but and great that the sort of script about the con ends with a con and a double con. That is such a lovely and appropriate coda. And I love these two, and I'm glad that I like that. Isn't it funny how we like a lovable thief, whereas thieves are awful people. They steal stuff off you. But there's why we're attracted to rogues. I think because because they don't quite play by the rules. But in reality, I don't like people who steal things from people. I don't think they're very nice. So, and they're still thinking, reminding us that this is about the key to time, and of course, and it's very smart that the Jethric, the thing that it's a lot of the drama is centered around is the thing, part of the thing that is also part of a bit of bluff and double bluff and the much sought after thing that does whatever it is it does. Basically, it's the IT crowd, isn't it? We've got to switch the universe off and back on again, which is, remarkably prescient when you think about how modern technology works. But basically, the universe is Windows or any form of modern technology. Presumably, it can only be controlled by... it doesn't have any buttons on it. You need a special remote control that currently in Haydock Towers is still lost. And I love the fact that everybody gets a solo credit that you can read. I mean, that's going to be a constant thing for me, but I don't think there's anything wrong with having a little bit of time to acknowledge the people that have made the thing that you like. And I think it encourages people to think about the creativity that they have witnessed, and it gives credit to the people who have done the thing that you like. And I don't think the world of entertainment is any better because we don't do such things quite so well anymore. But there we go. I'm aware that I'm probably trying to swim against a tide that has long since gone out and drowned me. Anyway, I have to choose a thing from episode 4 and a bonus thing. I'm aware I didn't choose the sort of snowy, the whole design and snowiness of Ribos. I don't think I did I? Sorry, I did this first the other night. I chose that bit that I can see on the DVD menu, which is the door opening. So I chose that. In the first episode, I chose the bin row scene, and I chose the Scringe Stone. So no. So but I love the Seeker. I love Paul Seed as the Graph. I think Robert Keegan as Sherlock is very good as well, and I love the kissing. I love the Seeker. I love the fact that Prentice Hancock has a good time and a role that suits him, that he carries off. But they're all actory things, aren't they? So there's pretty much, put it like this: I am spoilt for choice. Dudley Simpson's music is great. I've got a nasty feeling that Dudley Simpson, because I didn't choose him for Evil of the Daleks, and I really should have done because it's one of his best scores, and I was occasionally clutching for straws doing that. I've got a really nasty feeling I'll get to the end of this and look back and go, I never chose Dudley Simpson because I sort of took him for granted. And that's sort of how I feel sometimes about my career. I think everyone assumes I'm around, so they don't need to employ me. I'd rather think that about myself than just people thinking I'm rubbish and not worth employing. The little psychological games we play. And Tim saying this is perfect viewing for a wintry evening. I have been watching this on 2 wintry evenings and thoroughly enjoying it. If you're not familiar with the Ribos operation, I hope this has inspired you to give it another go, because I think it's fabulous. Thanks to Dan for inspiring me, but I've got to stop talking and choose my 2 favourite things before listening to Dan's. So I'm going to choose the environs of Ribos, maybe as my bonus thing before I choose my specific thing for episode 4. I think my thing across the whole story is the snowy wastes, the fact that prompts then has, costuming policy and set policy, and the whole design and feel of Ribos and the realization of it, I think is great, and I think it suits studio-bound drama. Doctor Who is full of people being very ambitious and writing scenes that are impossible to pull off in a studio. And you admire that ambition, but it's not always rewarding for the viewer. This is a writer going, and a director and design department all going, well, we could do it like this, and it'll act with the resources that we have, and it will tell the story, it will suit the story, and it will also suit the resources that we have at our disposal. And I think it's a great synthesis, and I think it's an underrated production. Everyone talks about the sparkling script and the characters. It's a fine production. So yeah, the design, the conception, the realization of Ribos itself is my bonus thing. And my thing for part 4, I do like the Seeker, and there's no one quite like her. But I do love that moment where the Graf, marches off to win the war and ends up getting blown to pieces by the Doctor. Let's not talk about that. What do I choose? I'm going to go for the Seeker. I simply think because Paul Seed is brilliant, and I think he's one of the best versions of powerful men who go mad in Doctor Who, often which were played by Prentice Hancock, actually. And he does it so well. And the backstory and the characterization, all that are great. But I think the Seeker is so different. And as I say, I'm uncomfortable with how she sits in the Doctor Who universe because she represents prophecy that actually comes off. But I think I think she's really well. She again is an element of the design, so there's a bit of crossover there. But I think I'm going to say the Seeker. So those are my two things. But with honourable mentions to all of the other stuff. I didn't even mention Ian Cuthbertson, who's brilliant. Garen is a fantastic character. He's the best rogue, I think, that's ever been in Doctor Who, and Unstoff. Those two are great. Again, sometimes you could be so good you're taken for granted, and that's the richness we have with Doctor Who and with the character actors we have that populate Doctor Who. But no, I'm going to commit to Ribos and to the Seeker. What has Dan chosen?
So my favourite thing in episode 4, I am going to cheat very slightly because I really want to talk about the performances in this whole serial, but I want to really think about one of the things I really love in episode 4 is Paul Seed's performance as the Graf Finder K. And I want to kind of talk about that because I think it's a big performance. You could easily think it's very over the top and slightly hammy. But I don't think it is. I think it's actually perfectly judged. The story as a whole has got a wonderfully theatrical quality to it. The costumes feel very theatrical somehow to me, and there's a kind of real richness in the dialogue, which I think allows the characters to all of them, a little bit larger than life. What I think is great about what Paul Seed does actually right the way through is you get a really strong sense of this man who clearly is a thug and a psychopath, but also he manages to show you a guy who is just pathetic and desperate and humiliated by the fact that his half-brother has stolen the throne from him, and he's seething with resentment and frustration and burning shame. And you get that the whole way through, and it pushes that his sense of desperation more and more and more until we get to this point, get to the wonderful point when he does kind of lose it, and he is marching into the catacombs unknowingly with bombs strapped to him, imagining himself to be back in the Alliance wars. And I think he does that absolutely wonderfully. But of course, I can't just talk about his performance because actually Ian Cuthbertson's Garen is just, it's just wonderful. Again, it's a huge performance. It's big and barnstorming. But of course, that's also because the part that Garen is playing when he says he gives the impression that he's this real estate salesman is this rather grand, rather posh, a little bit pompous, used to dealing with high and important persons, and therefore having a certain kind of aristocratic air. You know, that wonderful bit where they've just signed the million OPEX off to the guard in the strong room, and the dear old Prentice Hancock has the line about, you know, we have to lock up the room for the end of the day, and Gowron has that line, "Oh, a most interesting ceremony. Would you care to watch?" And it's a very sort of, he has that wonderful air that is there to convince these really dangerous people that he is the person that he thinks he is. And then, of course, we get Ian Cuthbertson's Hackney Wick accent, which is also very funny. And then, of course, he even does a bit of Somerset in the first one as well. So he's kind of great. Nigel Plaskett is a wonderful foil for him. Robert Keegan is a wonderful foil for Paul Seed. Robert Keegan as Sholak. They've got a wonderful, interesting, slightly homoerotic bond between them. And then, of course, the other great double act in this episode is Tom Baker and Mary Tam as the Dr. Romana. And they're fantastic, aren't they? I mean, it's really interesting. For the first time, the Doctor is really resituated by his companion. So suddenly he's not the smartest person in the universe. Romana is actually smarter than he is, and he becomes petulant and sulky, but then also sort of demonstrates he kind of has kind of practical, intuitive, common sense knowledge that's very resourceful and gets them out of the situation. But they're very, very funny the whole way through. And Mary Tam's wonderful kind of cool ice maiden thing is a brilliant foil for this sort of fizzing, wiry, you know, whatever he was, 6'5" energy that Tom Baker exudes. So I've got to say, I think the performances are the thing that brings the whole series in episode 4 up to a wonderful crescendo. So that's my episode 4 thing.
Isn't that interesting that he touched upon? We came to sort of different conclusions, but by travelling the same path, I got to the Seeker, who he didn't mention actually, and he got to Paul Seed, who I mentioned a lot, but via the homoeroticism of Shellac and the Graph, the brilliance of Ian Cuthbertson. I didn't touch upon the Doctor and Romana in the way that Dan did actually, but that is a very key point, and about the sudden change in the Doctor's status. But I loved how our thoughts sort of intersected on that, but then he went off into slightly different directions, which I agreed with all of and were very illuminating. I do love, I mean, I'm not having a conversation with him, but talking about Doctor Who with people, you know, who I am simpatico with, but who nonetheless, you know, then will conjure up something that, you know, my thought process is perhaps touched upon, but, you know, take it off in a different direction. And I was somebody that didn't have anybody really to talk to about Doctor Who for many, 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 many years. It was the love that dared not speak its name. And I'm so grateful for that. And I think that's hopefully what's interesting about this is that it's not just me gassing on, which I think, you know, unfortunately is part of the deal. But what I've loved about doing this so far is the different perspectives of the people that have kindly contributed have opened my eyes, and I hope yours, and I also hope have you know, introduced you to some people whose work you'll go off to seek out after you've watched the story they've been talking about, because Dan's stuff is great, by the way. Right, so what's his? So that's annoying, because I nearly said I think I could have. If I think because he led with Paul Seed, I think if I'd chosen Paul Seed in that death moment for the Graph, I think I might have taken that as being along similar lines to Dan, which would have made me even Steve. Which would have made me win, because it was 2-1 to me coming into this, because we'd both chosen the same thing for episodes 2 and 3, but because he didn't mention the Seeker either, even though I talked a lot about the performances in getting to the Seeker, I think I cannot claim that one. So we are 2-2. This is still the best I've ever done. Going into the bonus thing. So if he chooses the snowy, catacomby, costumey, policy, war and PC thing of Ribos, I will actually win for the first time. And I've done quite a few of these. I'm going to juggle around with the release order, often on a whim, because I have power and I'm going to blooming well yield it. But and I've enjoyed this one, and I'm recording on a winter's night, and I think it might be worth listening to on a winter's night. Anyway, even though I've got quite a few in the can actually, I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I hope you are. What's Dan's final thing?
And then the thing I love about the whole story is Robert Holmes. I've got to say Robert Holmes, haven't I? I mean, I still think he's the greatest writer who ever wrote for Doctor Who. Old series, new series. He's the person who absolutely got it. And just, I mean, again, it's that creating the worlds, but, he's also, he manages to find so many tones in there. It's one of the funniest stories. It's possibly only City of Death is a funnier script in the classic series than this one. It's full of brilliantly funny stories, moments, situations, kind of story beats and so on. The things I was saying before about all the performances, the double acts, we all know Robert Holmes is great at double acts, but the double acts absolutely structure the whole thing. He's the person who's created the world of the play. So he's finding incredible space in this really, for the classic serial, a really tightly packed story for these little hints of a hinterland to the world outside that make it a very kind of believable world that we're in. And yeah, it's a tightly packed story. There's tons of plot, to the point, I have to say, I think when I watched this, when it went out, I would have been 9 or 10 or something like that. I think it took me listening to it, because I think I recorded it on cassette at that age. It probably took listening to it kind of 5 or 6 times before I really understood the story. But nonetheless, it's a brilliant story. It's such a funny, clever idea to have a con artist who pretends to be a real estate salesman who pretends to sell planets. It's a version of that, the con artist who sold London Bridge to a tourist. It's that kind of idea. And there's always a bit of satire in Robert Holmes. A couple of stories earlier, he's mocking the tax system in The Sunmakers, and here he is looking at kind of estate agents and using some of the horror that we have of estate agents, and putting that in Garon, and so that becomes really funny and very pointed. It's beautifully told as well. The cliffhangers, maybe not so much the first one, but the second and third one are real proper story beat cliffhangers. They properly move things along. They're not just 30 seconds peril for the sake of a cliffhanger. So it's a really, really great script. For me, this is the single greatest script that was ever written for Doctor Who from 1963 to the present.
Well, praise indeed. Praise indeed. There was no way I was going to choose Robert Holmes, probably because, again, we sort of take him for granted. And it's funny how I'll pick out an actor, but I might not pick out a script writer, because I'll pick out individual bits of the script. I don't know. But the rules for this is you choose a thing. And for some people, it's going to be a childhood reminiscence. For some people, it's going to be a feeling that they get. I mean, Simon Gurrier, when we did Evil of the Daleks, was for something that the fact that we had no idea what's going on. And yeah, choosing the writer and the script as a whole is almost hiding in plain sight, a bit like the Jethric. But I was never going to choose that. I see, I'm doomed to fail in this project, but I don't mind that. I think if I set myself up to fail, I won't be disappointed. I think I've already said that, even repeating myself even this early into the process. But it's how I've spent my life, is expecting not to succeed. So if it happens one day, and I was close with this, I'm going to take 3-2 to me. I'm going to take the fact that Dan and I, and we had so many crossovers even in the bits that we ended up not tallying with exactly. I've really enjoyed, even though I was talking all the way through it, part of me wants to now shut up and watch it again without being interrupted by me. But I've got more stories to watch and I've got more things to do. But maybe if you do, if you didn't watch it first time round without me gassing on, there's so much in that story. I cannot wait to watch that story again, just for entertainment's sake. I'm invigorated by Dan's perspectives on it and his expert eye. And he, as I say, he's a very, very skilled writer himself. But he gave us the perspectives of, he's a writer, but a fan as well. And that was a real celebration of a great bit of Doctor Who. This is the stuff. This is what I imagine. This is what I hope. No, I don't know what I imagined, but I found this a very rewarding segment of this podcast, which will be a podcast, I'm sure, of ups and downs. So I hope you're as enthused as I have been. I hope, and I hope you avail yourself of some of Dan's work. I communicated with him after I'd done episodes 1 to 3, just to say how much I'd enjoyed his contribution and the effort that he'd gone to. He filmed in the TARDIS. And we got talking about stuff, and he just said to say that he's got a radio play on January the 4th, 2021 at 2 p.m. on BBC Radio 4, and it will be on BBC Sounds for a month, and it's called You and Me, and it's about the Me Too movement, but has a twist, because as well as being a very funny and very intelligent man, Dan, he's a political writer too. He's got things to say. But he's not po-faced about it. He's a very witty man. He talked, he was celebrating Robert Holmes's double acts there. The characters that were in the script of Dead Souls that I did for Radio 4, that Dan wrote, which was the first time we met, it was full of brilliant characters. So actually there's a bit of Robert Holmes there. I'm not saying he in any way lifted anything or anything like that, but there's clearly... And Dan is a fantastic writer in his own right, but there are perhaps similarities in the ability to conjure comedy and incident and tell story through character between Robert Holmes and Dan Rebellato. So if you, like Dan, like this script, you'll also like his script. So I hope you avail yourself of his work. I'm really flattered that he's given the time to this. And it's been actually nice for me to then reconnect with him and have little chats as we've had about other things, because Doctor Who, has a way. It's a common language, isn't it, between us? So I hope you haven't had to work too hard to translate my nonsense, my barrage of verbal diarrhea. It's been nice talking to you about this brilliant Doctor Who story. I hope we can do another one soon. I hope you'll join me for another one soon. I loved the Ribos operation to the extent that I actually pronounced its name right more often than I didn't, which surprised me. Wrap up warm. It's winter. But that doesn't mean you can't have a lot of fun, as proved by this brilliant Doctor Who story. Definitely the planet Ribos is a happy time and a happy place, and I'll see you at another one of those next time. But for now, thanks for listening, and a very good night to you. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which was presented by me, Toby Haydoke, with my special guest, Dan Rebellato. Sincere thanks to this episode's featured patrons, Rob Leonard, Kevin West, Hendrik Korzeniowski, Kazin, and Duncan Harvey. Dan Rebellato's play, You and Me, was on BBC Radio 4 on January the 4th and is therefore available until February the 4th on BBC Sounds. Do check it out. Now, I will be returning to a more sensible schedule. I rush-released The Rescue for my birthday and to tie it in with its original broadcast, and I hurried this one out in order to give you time to listen to Dan's play. So don't think of this as a normal work rate, because otherwise I'll keel over. The next happy time and place will be stuck by a lake with a missile convoy, because, oh yes, it's less of a commentary, more of a battlefield. Next time. Boom. Don't forget to subscribe and to please rate this 5 stars wherever you happen to pick up your podcasts. Leave a nice review too if you can find the time to do so. And subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. And you can become a patron at patreon.com/Toby Haydock, because these podcasts don't make themselves and there are extra goodies there as well and advance releases. Or you can make a one-off donation at kofi.com/Toby Haydock. But mostly, thanks for listening, and I hope you're very well, and I hope you're very happy.